Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lysha and I'm the owner of Lysha Be Creative. So today we're back with another video and we're going to be creating this design right here. So of course you guys know, as always, I will list everything that I used in today's video down in the description box down below. You'll even find discount codes for a lot of the products that I like to use and ones that I'm always constantly talking about in all of my videos. Before you leave though, be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. All right guys, let's go ahead and jump right into today's video. Okay, so while you are watching me prep this 20-ounce hog, let's get into why I'm recreating this design. So this design is actually a recreation or a remake of a previous tumbler that I made. So this tumbler right here, this sad looking mermaid tumbler, was the very first tumbler I ever made in my tumbler journey. And it is owned by my mom. She's so sweet, of course. She said it was absolutely beautiful when really it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life, personally. That's my view on that cup. So I saw this cup recently when I was at her house hanging out, and I literally was like, I have to remake this cup. This cup is so sad looking. Like, let's give this a new revamped look. So that is the inspiration behind today's tutorial, and we're going to go kind of in a different direction with this, still putting together all the elements for like a mermaid vibes tumbler, but we are definitely going to steer clear of that ugly, horrendous looking decal, but we will be incorporating, of course, some fish scales or some mermaid scales and a lot of other elements to kind of pull this all together. So the first thing I'm starting with is I have this beautiful mermaid fish scale holographic print from Lysha Creations. She just recently launched some holographic patterns, and this was part of the bundle and collection of holographic patterns that she currently offers. It is currently out of stock as of the recording of this video. However, she is going to be restocking those and coming out with brand new patterns. So I'm going to go ahead, of course, and trim everything up. I'm going to go ahead and measure on my cup because I want to make sure we can get a full wrap on this cup. So just taking my scissors and cutting where I know I'm going to need to cut with my paper cutter to make sure I have enough vinyl to go all the way around. I will be using these scrap pieces for other projects that are actually going to go as part of this design, kind of this bundle, if you will, that I'm sending off to somebody. And so I'm going to now go ahead and get this section, this nice, beautiful rectangle square we've got going on here, and apply it to my cup. So of course, as always, I love to use my cup cradle as sort of my holder for helping keep my cups in place while I apply vinyl. The holographic vinyl is a little bit thicker than your traditional pattern vinyl, so that's something to be mindful of. You definitely would have no issues whatsoever applying it to a straight cup, but I can imagine that you might have some difficulties trying to apply it to a tapered cup or one that has a curve at the center section. So something to be mindful when you're trying out these newer vinyls is that, you know, a lot of them are always going to be really forgiving with a straight-sided cup, but there are some challenges and difficulties that obviously come when you get into the tapered cup or the curved cup. So once I get this fully applied to my tumbler, of course, the last thing we're going to do before we can do any other and additional work with this cup is we're going to go ahead and trim this really nicely. So the bottom I actually really lined up nicely and well, and I actually don't have any need to sort of mess with that whatsoever, so I end up leaving that. But we are going to cut off the little bit of excess where the two pieces of vinyl overlap. You'll see me using a piece of painter's tape here. This has kind of been my new way to cut along the seam where the two sections of vinyl meet when on either side. This has really been helpful in keeping my line nice and straight, number one, but as well as keeping it a little bit easier to cut because that layer of painter's tape kind of gives to a little bit more thickness. It's much easier to see that little divot and line I made with my squeegee tool, just the edge of that, so that I can get my craft knife into that crevice there and really get that removed in a nice clean sweep. So now on to our rims. Again, our bottom looks really good. I was pretty satisfied with that. I didn't even need to like really push any vinyl towards the bottom. Like everything was just perfectly straight. So I didn't mess with that, but we are going to go ahead and trim up the top here. So just very carefully pushing all of that vinyl up and over the edge. Again, being very mindful and careful to ensure I don't have any wrinkles or creating any air pockets that may be crinkling up the vinyl, which could cause it to pucker or kind of leave those creased lines at the top edge of my cup. Then taking that craft knife and just trimming that all up. So this looks pretty good. I'm satisfied with this. So let's get into, of course, adding some glitter to this. So we're going to be using a lot of different glitters. I will list off the glitters that I'm using here. They're from a lot of different places. I will list them on the screen as I mentioned, but I'll also have them in the description box and where you can get them. Really my thought process for this is the glitter doesn't so much matter because we are changing this into a peekaboo design. However, I did make sure to pick glitters that matched my vinyl, and I really gravitated towards those glitters that already had those color shift properties or ones that had like that holographic look to them, because I knew that they would really pair well with this holographic vinyl we're going with. So back to our tumbler design here, you'll notice that I put a piece of stencil vinyl kind of at an angle on this cup. We're going to go back to a technique that I recently showed on my channel in my leopard galaxy swirl tumbler that we created. And so I'm using my stencil vinyl in place of what I originally used, which was tape. And I have just placed that at an angle, and now I'm going to take a marker and just make a very jagged, irregular squiggly line all the way down. This will just be the line that I end up following with my craft knife because I want my vinyl to be present, but because I'm also adding glitter, I want to make sure that I have a nice clean section of vinyl exposed without any contamination of glitter, and be able to keep those edges irregular to make it look like this was all part of the overall aesthetic and design of the cup and not kind of an afterthought with those really straight-sided edges. So just trimming this all up, making sure that everything is nice and straight, and then we will get into adding our glitter. So as I mentioned, we are going to use different cuts of glitter here. I'm using a lot of chunky mixes. I do only use like a couple of like medium to finer cut glitters. I'm going to be obviously laying a lot of these glitters on top of this vinyl, but I'm also being sure to be mindful that I am getting a nice blend of all the colors. It's going to be a peekaboo, yes, but I still don't want super harsh lines where the colors separate each other or go one into the other. I want there to be like a nice blend so it looks purposeful and doesn't look kind of, it doesn't look kind of harsh. Anyway, so we're going to be applying the glitter with the epoxy method application. It's my favorite way to apply glitter. I find to get the best coverage when it comes to applying with epoxy. And so we're going to go ahead and just mix up about 5 ml of epoxy here. Again, we don't need a whole lot of epoxy when you're doing epoxy method glitter application. We're going to do just a real thin coat of this, less than half of that little mix of epoxy, which was about 5 ml in total. And that's going to give me all of the coverage that I'm going to need, or all the epoxy I'm going to need to get my glitter to stick to this vinyl and this tumbler, okay? So you'll notice I am not really, being careful not to get anything on that stencil vinyl. It doesn't really matter because any glitter that gets on top of that is not going to be shown through. But I want to make sure that I am getting a nice even coverage, a nice thin coat of that epoxy from top to bottom. That way we can make sure to cover every section of this cup in glitter. So we're going to start off, of course, with some of my chunkier glitters. And you will also notice as I go through this, I'm not really going to do a whole lot of talking with the process of the glitter portion because there's not really any technique other than things I've already showed you or told you guys before. But I'm going to start with some of my chunkier colors before I move into some of the finer colors, which will just help to cover up, some of the vinyl that's exposed underneath still. But I'm going in with my chunkier glitters and I'm just placing them over the sections that matches the vinyl. So I was really thoughtful and careful in picking glitters, again, that had those components of color shift or holographic, but I also was being mindful to pick colors that best matched my vinyl. So I have a lot of like green to blue color shift. I have some like magenta holographic, you know, some purple to green shifting glitters as well. All ones that really play into the overall color palette that we're going with for this cup, and that are colors that really pop off of this vinyl. So that was Ariella from 4K Glitter. That is the glitter line from a Vinyl Gallery. Love, love, love that color. I think that would look absolutely beautiful in a mermaid themed or mermaid inspired snow globe tumbler as well. Now I'm going to go in with Dragonfly. So this is not a color I get a whole lot of use out of, but it's absolutely beautiful and one of those glitters that you could just take off the shelf and just stare at. It's like a green to blue shifting glitter, and it's perfect if you're making like dragon cups, you know, mermaid scales, anything that needs that kind of color shift look. It's a really beautiful and unique glitter that I definitely needed to have as part of my collection. So of course, speeding through this process, I'm going to go ahead and speed up this section right here, but we're going to go ahead and just continue to layer these glitters in the different sections. The idea here is that I'm not only paying attention to how I am blending my glitters, so blending from, you know, as the colors come together, but I'm also making sure that I'm covering every inch of this vinyl that's going to be exposed. I'm not really caring if I get enough glitter on the blue section because that's the stencil vinyl and that is not going to matter, but I want to make sure that right up to that edge and even a little bit over that edge that I am getting glitter on. That way I can make sure that the majority of the pattern vinyl is covered up. In hindsight, yes, for those of you who really get upset or frustrated when I like use a full piece of vinyl and then basically cover up most of it, this does waste a little bit of vinyl, and I probably could have just cut a section and done a little bit of a jagged edge that way with like a swirl pattern. But this is just one of those things that is just the way that I work through the process, and how I'm most creative is I go into most of my cup designs, as I've explained to you guys, I go into them with just the thought of just wanting to be creative, and I don't always have a game plan for what I think the end result of the cup is going to look like. I might have some general ideas and some maybe techniques that I know that I want to try, but I don't always have like a game plan from start to finish of a cup. So a lot of times I might start with a full vinyl wrap, and then by the end, you might only be able to see like 25% of that vinyl, kind of in this case here. And that's just because that's just how my brain works and how I'm able to kind of work through my own creative process to get to my end result. So once I removed this stencil piece, I did let that dry for about 3 to 4 hours. I would say I did use a regular setting epoxy, so let that totally cure before I put it on the turner. I did also go in with a clear gloss coat of spray paint just to make sure I didn't get any movement in between my glitter section to my vinyl section. And then I applied 2 coats of epoxy over this until smooth. We're now going to just sand those rims, of course, the top and bottom being our biggest focus section here. Just really being mindful that we get a nice smooth surface so we can move into the Peekaboo portion of this cup. So we are back with this cup, and so I still want to make sure that I'm keeping that vinyl exposed, and so we're going to go back and cover up this section of vinyl a little bit, though overlapping the glitter section, because I do want a little bit of that edge of the glitter to also show through the next jagged edge section I'm going to make here. So certainly you don't have to go back and do this, or you could have not done the kind of cutting of the stencil vinyl to create that like cover up section the first time and then just done it at this point if you were confident that you wouldn't get glitter in your vinyl section that's meant to be exposed. I didn't have any faith in myself in that right in regard, so I decided that, you know, I'm doing this kind of, again, we're repeating the process from the glittering process to now so that we can cover this up and get it covered enough that we can then go spray paint the cup. So I'm just going to cover up all of the vinyl again because we will be spray painting this, and I want to make sure none of that spray paint ends up on the actual vinyl. I want to remain nice and clear, clean, and exposed. And then I'm just going to take my craft knife and I'm going to go ahead and trim another jagged edge. This one here, you know, again, I didn't end up going in with a marker this time, because I do want some of that glitter to be exposed that is overlapping the vinyl, like where those two edges meet. So I didn't really go in with the pen. I just didn't feel like it was necessary. So I just did my best to create a very jagged edge along this, the two edges of where the vinyl is underneath. And this just allows, again, to really make it look like the vinyl is part of the full aesthetic of the design and not sort of an afterthought with the placement of super straight or harsh lines. So I'm just going to do that on both sides of this section of tape here. And then we can go ahead and get this ready to be spray painted. So before we can spray paint this for our Peekaboo, I did end up going into Cricut Design Space and I grabbed just a, mermaid scale pattern. And I ended up just cutting a few scales. I knew I didn't need a lot because that glittered section there is not huge. And so I do want some of that glitter to be exposed, of course. But I didn't necessarily want the entire section there to be covered with scales. So at first you're going to see me apply these with just the back of my craft knife. I thought I only wanted like a few of them placed. And then I ended up deciding that would probably be a little bit easier for me to just use a little bit of transfer tape to kind of get these applied a little bit quicker and a little bit faster. So I end up just grabbing my piece of transfer tape and applying a bunch of these. I applied probably about half of these, just in different cluster forms. Again, not really a whole thought process other than I mostly was focused on like where I was going to be placing these, making sure that I was getting different colors of glitter exposed so that we could kind of see all of this beautiful glitter underneath, even if we're not going to see the entire section in its full glitter glory. So once I've gotten that section applied with all of this stencil vinyl, I then will be able to go in and get this spray painted. So this time, instead of using a flat white spray paint to spray paint over this whole section, including the bottom, I ended up doing a semi-gloss spray paint. So normally you guys know that I will use like a flat white spray paint or like a primer white paint just to spray paint over. But what I have found is that my alcohol ink colors tend to be a little bit more vibrant and go on a little bit, I don't want to say brighter, but like juicier, if that makes sense, if I apply a gloss white spray paint versus applying something that's flat, which makes sense, right? When you apply, paint or alcohol ink to something that's super glossy, it's going to kind of mimic that glossiness. Whereas if you apply to something that's a flat, then you definitely get more of like a flatter look with your colors. So once I spray painted that, we're going to go ahead and let that dry, of course, until it was, completely dry to the touch. And then we're going to get into adding some alcohol inks here. So I have 3 colors here. I have Wild Plum, Purple Twilight, both of which are Ranger alcohol inks, and then I have Hades from Jen's Crafted Gems. That was in her primary pack. So with this, I'm just going to take my little sponges there. Again, those magic erasers or those melamine sponges that you can get, sort of the off-brand ones, I certainly encourage you to grab instead of buying the actual magic erasers. Save yourself a little money. I picked mine up right at the dollar store, really inexpensive. And what we're going to do here is, right now I'm just starting out and just kind of laying my landscape of all the colors. So I started with my Wild Plum color, which is probably one of my favorite. These 2 Ranger alcohol inks are my 2 favorite colors in alcohol inks that are not from Jen's Crafted Gems. I always use these. I gravitate towards these 2 colors. They're just really beautiful. But then I'm going to go in, I went in with Wild Plum. Now we're going in with Hades, which is kind of like that bluish green color. Again, trying to pull out some of those colors that are in the vinyl as well as our glitter selection. And then I'm going to go in and cover up all of the exposed white paint. And I'm going to go in and cover up that section with Purple Twilight. You will notice as I kind of overlapped my sections that it does bring out this beautiful royal blue, which I think just continues to just add to the, like the deep underwater colors that I'm kind of going for with this cup. And so I'm just making sure to cover up all the spray paint and not have any of that white spray paint exposed. Once I have all of the colorant on there, now is kind of where I guess you could say the magic happens. So at this point, I'll take a clean sponge, one that hasn't gotten any alcohol ink on it, and I will dip that in alcohol, rubbing alcohol, squeeze that out a bit because we don't want too much because it'll make your colors run. And then I'm going to go ahead and literally just pounce that sponge all over the cup. And as I'm doing that, the colors will start to expand and blend. And then I'm blowing on the cup to get those colorants to continue to expand outward, as well as kind of speed up the drying process so that it doesn't cause any of my colors to continue to run together. So I have a couple other tutorials on my channel where I use alcohol ink. And so I will list them down in the description box in case anybody kind of wants a more in-depth tutorial on working with alcohol ink. There's lots of different ways to work with alcohol inks. This is just one of my favorite ways to do so. So I've done that a couple times on my channel already. So I'll link those down in the description box for anybody who needs a more in-depth look at using inks. So once I'm done with the alcohol, I'm just going to continue to play with this until I feel satisfied. So working with alcohol inks is one of those, items or elements that you use that really are just, they're your own feel. You stop when you feel like you're good, and then you can walk away from the cup, okay? So, decide on what look you're going for before you decide to walk away. I usually just play with it until I get enough of like the blending happening, as well as a lot of like that cell or like almost like veining throughout the cup when I've applied the alcohol. That's kind of what I'm looking for, and when I will stop and know that I am good and I'm satisfied with the blending process. So as soon as I'm done playing with my inks, I cleaned those up, and now I'm going to go in and remove all of the little vinyl stencil decals, those mermaid scales there. Get those removed. That way we can let this completely dry. So with alcohol inks, you guys know that I don't like to seal my alcohol inks. I only will just let them dry overnight, and then I'll go ahead and apply my coats of epoxy. And that is just kind of my way to do things. So before I get this cup though on the turner for epoxy, I am going to add 2 other elements to this cup to just kind of go with the aesthetic that I'm going for. So the first thing I have is this mermaid scale stencil that I got from Hobby Lobby. And so now that my alcohol inks are dry, I know I can add this paint over top, and it's not going to change the color of my inks or remove any of my ink. So I'm going to take a little makeup beauty blender that I have. I have a bunch of these small ones, and we're going to take this colored paint called Silver Flash. It's a color shifting paint that I got from Hobby Lobby as well. And I'm going to go ahead and use that to stencil on some more of these mermaid scales in sections in between the glittered ones that we had exposed after we removed the stencil vinyl. So I will say that when you're using a stencil and using paint, less is more. The less paint, the better your stencil is going to come out. My stencil came out a little bit blurred and a little bit kind of muddled, and I think it was because I applied too much paint. I was just so eager to get these on. So it didn't matter how tight I was holding that stencil to the cup. Some of it kind of bled through or bled under. So the less amount of paint that you use when you're using like a stencil, the better, unless you're going to go in, of course, with like a marker or something and trace that, as opposed to using paint or something to kind of stencil these sections out. So I'm just going to do this in a couple of sections, nothing too crazy, just a few of them. I just felt like this additional Silver Flash, like color shifting look, just continued to go with, again, the holographic pattern, the holographic glitter, and really just brought out some of the brightness of the alcohol ink colors that we were using to really just continue to add to the overall aesthetic. Again, another one of these cups that just continues to, I continue to add more things to the cup before I feel like I'm fully done with that, if that makes sense. You guys know me, I feel like I'm never done working on a cup, especially if I don't go into a cup with a full start to finish idea. I'm always adding things, taking things away, adding more things, going, ooh, let's add this. And that's just kind of how my brain works when I'm working in my creative process. So after I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to clean up any of the areas that I can where I got a little bit too much paint in those fish scale, mermaid scale sections. And then I'm going to take another sponge, and we're going to take the alcohol ink Lucid, and we're going to go around the edge of the vinyl where the vinyl and glitter and alcohol ink meet. And we're trying to just establish a little bit of some imperfection there. Again, continuing to add to that irregular look that I'm trying to get where the vinyl meets the glitter and the alcohol ink. And so I'm starting with Lucid, which is just going to kind of brighten up any of the alcohol ink that's along the edges here. It is still going to blend, of course, right? When you put alcohol ink on top of alcohol ink, of course, it is going to not only blend a little bit, but it is going to remove some of that alcohol ink that was already placed there. But I am also getting a little bit more alcohol ink onto the vinyl and glitter that was just under that section or just off of that section there that wasn't covered with tape. After I am satisfied with adding the Lucid, I'm going to go back and take the Silver Flash again and the other edge of that Beauty Blender and add a little bit of that Silver Flash again, kind of pouncing off any excess glitter, but really just trying to overlap that Silver Flash on top of that Lucid, which we use to lighten up those alcohol ink colors. And I'm going to do this until I feel that I'm satisfied. This is definitely something that you could leave off totally if you wanted to. I just feel like it added a little bit of sort of, again, pulling in and tying in those fish scales that we just put on there to just continue to add to this kind of pop out fish scale look. So now we have let that dry for about 20 to 30 minutes and we are on the turner. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a coat of epoxy here, just a nice thin coat over the cup, enough that my hand kind of can glide very smoothly and easily before we add our colorants to our little kind of pots of epoxy. So I did mix up a full 30 mLs, although I did not end up using all 30 mLs on this cup. And so with the remaining bit of epoxy that I had in my original pot of epoxy, I've separated the epoxy into 3 cups, and we're going to add some additional colorants so we can add some sort of like wave and Milky Way line work to this cup. So in that first cup, I'm putting Alumilite's white epoxy dye. Just a drop of that goes a long way. Less is more with that white epoxy dye. And then I also added a little bit of some pearl alcohol ink to give it a little shimmer. In the second cup here, I'm adding a Craft Barrel Paint Aquamarine, which is going to give kind of like that green turquoisey look. And then finally, this is actually a pour paint, but I could not find a color similar. This is like it's called Galaxy Purple or something like that. So it came in the pour paint collection that I grabbed from Hobby Lobby or Michael's forever ago. But it was the only color that was best representative of what colors I already had on the cup that I actually had on hand. So we're going to get those all mixed up and make sure that that is thoroughly mixed, I should say, inside of the epoxy before we go ahead to apply this to our tumbler. So I have walked through the process of like doing a Milky Way on my channel before, and that's kind of the idea that we're going with here. However, we're only going to focus on the 2 edges we have on the cup where our vinyl meets our paint, glitter, and alcohol inks. Okay, so that is where we're going to be focusing most of our efforts here on the cup with these strings of epoxy. So I always like to start with the white. I feel like the white always gives like a great barrier and a great starting point before I add some of the deeper, more richer colors. So I kind of go in a little bit heavy with the white, knowing that I will be wiping quite a bit of this away as I begin to blend the other colors in. But after I've gotten my white down, I will start to grab my heat gun and just start to blow out or fan out those colors, really focusing on some of those sections where the color went in pretty heavy, pretty thick, just to kind of thin them out a little bit. Because again, we don't want the white overtaking the cup, and I really would love to get like a beautiful fanned out and cell sort of look with this, with these colors to really just add to the palette of color we have already happening on the cup. So I'm going to go in with my finger here, and at this point, at any point really, when you're adding your colorants to and lines of colored epoxy to your cup, you can go in and just take your glove finger and just swipe out any excess you have or anything that's doing too much running for you because you've added too much heat. And then you're going to go in with your next colors. So then I went in with the aquamarine color, and I was really kind of following just on the like inner section of those white lines and creating and following kind of that line, just layering right in front of it, not on top of it, but directly in front of it so that I can continue to push that colorant into the white and kind of getting a really pretty, hopefully kind of wave kind of look for this cup. So once I'm done with that color, I then can go into my purple galaxy color here. And so with this, I'm going to go through both colors. So you're going to see me use this like purple and really like go all the way through the colors and kind of like an S pattern or a really true zigzag line. I want to pull this purple through the white and through the aquamarine. So I'm focusing and making sure I'm going through both colors as I kind of go all the way up the cup. So once I am done with adding my final colorant, I then will stop my turner, and this is where I'm just going to apply my heat. Again, the purpose of my heat gun is to just blow out those colors, thin things out, get a little bit of blending happening with all three of those colors, and really just sort of push things out and make them nice and kind of even. And then once I'm done and I'm satisfied with how things are looking, I'll start my turner back on, and then at this point it's like the cleanup process. So after I've gotten my colors on, I feel like I've added enough heat. I'm now just going to let it spin for a few turns, and this is where I do any cleaning up of things. So if there are areas on my cup that I just don't like how they look, if there are sections that are running too much, I'll just take my gloved finger and just kind of scoop those out and just remove those until I feel that I am satisfied with the entire look. So once I'm done sort of cleaning things up and I'm satisfied with how things are starting to swirl and blend together, I'm going to leave this on the turner until it's fully cured. So this is going to take about 6 to 8 hours to cure in my space here. I did use Flint Sisters Premium Epoxy for these layers of epoxy. That is the best way, using a regular set epoxy, best way when you're trying to do sort of Milky Ways or things where you're going to be spending more than 10 minutes on a cup, because you have a longer sort of pot life of your epoxy in a cup, so you don't have to worry about it thickening up or starting to cure on you. So before I leave this alone, you guys know that I can't just walk away from things. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a little bit of Filori to the alcohol ink section. That is a color from Peachy Olive Glitter. It's like a blue to white shifting glitter, but on a colored background, it really is translucent and really gives this sort of like pop of white color right off of those colorants. Then once I am satisfied with adding the Filori, just kind of sprinkling that in, I'm going to take Mirror Babe, which is also from Peachy Olive Glitters. This is like a mermaid inspired mix, and I'm literally going to take a really big pinch of that and follow the Milky Way lines we just made on the cup. So I love this glitter. I don't often get to use it, but it is perfect for mermaid cups, probably why it is named Merbabe. But I'm just taking this beautiful cluster of color and just dragging that along that wavy line I created with the lines of epoxy before I let this spin. So again, it'll spin for 68 hours. Overnight, just because this was the time of when I was doing this cup before I touch this cup again. So I'm going to go ahead and let that spin. After I've torched it, leave it alone till it's dry, and then we're going to come back to adding some additional elements to this cup in the next clip. So with that fully cured, we're going to go ahead and we're going to sand again. So we're going to sand that top rim. Really make sure we're getting a fine line of stainless steel. And we're doing this again because even though we did sand our rim before, remember we did add spray paint and then alcohol ink. So we no longer have that exposed stainless steel. So we need to go back in and make sure that we get that stainless steel exposed. After I've cleaned off my cup, I'm going to go ahead and apply this decal. So this decal I actually created in Procreate. I will have a link to the Dropbox file that you can grab this up yourself, this SVG. It was just something simple that I created in Procreate. Nothing too crazy. It says, be a mermaid, make waves. So that is the decal that we're placing on this cup. And so I'm just going to kind of center this decal. I did cut this decal on Tech Wrap Chrome Bubble Free vinyl. It's the purple lavender, I think, color is what it is. And so that was the vinyl that I used. Of course, I'll list that down in the description box as well, and a discount code that I have for you in case you'd like to grab that yourself. And so we're just going to get this applied straight in the center here using the hinge method. So I'm going to anchor down one side, and then I'll cut the backing off the other half, get that side adhered, and then we will peel back the original side and remove the backing off that section and anchor that section back down to the cup. So after I have gotten this section applied, remove the transfer tape, of course, and then just when you think I'm done, you know that I'm not. I have to be extra. So I was continuing to kind of stare at this cup, and I just wasn't sure what it was missing, and then I kind of landed on something. So I saw this technique, or saw Myra do this in a mold. So she used UV resin, and she was able to create like this really beautiful bubble look. And so we're going to try this out today. And I'm going to kind of walk you through kind of how this goes. Okay, so this UV resin that I just grabbed and I'm opening right now, this is UV resin from Trace Mustachios Co. I will link her business down in the description box. She has her own UV resin as well as she sells glitter. I encourage you to check her out. She has a beautiful store, and so I definitely encourage you to check her out. I love her UV resin. This is the first time I'm using it in this video, but I've used it on several projects since then. So what we're going to do is I am going to place large and small round circular balls of UV resin on this cup and cure them. Okay, so just go with me. I promise it'll make sense as you see this. So I did let it cure, of course, for like 60 seconds, but look how cute that looks, and look how it looks just like bubbles. So I was absolutely obsessed and decided I needed to do it all over this center section where the mermaid scales are. So of course we're just going to do this in a super hyper sped up section because nobody wants to watch me do this several times. But this is what the kind of end result of this looks like, and I'm really satisfied with how this is already coming out. So before we can get this back on the turner for final coats of epoxy, I did want to go back and outline my mermaid scales. I think this was going to certainly help making them kind of pop and stand out, but also for the ones that I did with the stencil and the silver flash color. Since some of the scales kind of blended together because I did too much paint, this is also going to help kind of draw out those and make them look a little bit more defined. So I went in with this purple color from... these are just Arteza paint markers. I grabbed this little pack of like 24 markers off of Amazon forever ago, and I still haven't used all the colors, but I just grabbed these kind of cute markers. You can use acrylic paint pens too, whatever you can kind of find on hand, but I decided to just go with purple and silver because that kind of goes the best and I think would work the best for kind of the color palette and aesthetic we have already on this cup. So I'm just going to go ahead and outline every single one of those little mermaid scale stencils that we had on there, and then I will let this dry. The acrylic paint pens really don't take too long to dry, literally just a couple minutes to dry, and then I was pretty satisfied with how everything was kind of looking. And then yeah, so after I am done with outlining this, I'm gonna go ahead and of course get this back on the turner for final coats of epoxy, and I am of course going to be using, you know it, Flint Sisters Premium Epoxy. It is my favorite epoxy to use. And don't forget, I do have a discount code down for you down in the description box. She did just release her Fast Cure Epoxy, and you guys already know I got my hands on it. It should be here any day now. And so you guys know that I will be telling you all about that as well as using it in my future tutorials as well. So this cup, of course, will go back on the turner for 2 final coats of epoxy. I do feel like I might be adding a couple more elements, so I didn't quite do the second to last coat yet, but I will be adding 1 more coat of epoxy to this, but I'm going to add a couple other elements I think to this cup. Maybe a part 2 of this tutorial. We'll have to just wait and see. So final coat of epoxy right here, and then of course let's take a look at the final look of this cup. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this remake of my very first tumbler. I definitely think that I'll be adding maybe a couple other elements before I kind of ship this off. But if you loved today's video and tutorial, be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!